Pinecrest Meadows was a serene and exclusive neighborhood, its clean streets lined with manicured lawns and modern villas. On a crisp Saturday morning, Claire Thompson stepped onto her driveway, broom in hand, feeling the pride of a new homeowner. At 42, Claire, a major in the U.S. Army, had finally settled into civilian life after 2 decades of service overseas. Purchasing this house was a personal victory, symbolizing years of hard work and dedication. Dressed casually in a blue t-shirt and sweats, her curly hair tied back, she was determined to make her new home shine. The hum of a car engine broke the silence. Claire glanced up to see a black and white police cruiser slowing down near her driveway. She paused, her grip on the broom tightening slightly as she noticed the 3 officers inside. Officer Ryan Miller, the driver, narrowed his eyes behind his sunglasses. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a sharp jawline, Miller radiated authority, but his expression carried a hint of suspicion. "Take a look at this," he muttered to his partner, Officer David Brooks. Brooks, a stocky man with a permanent smirk, glanced at Claire and chuckled. "Well, that's something you don't see every day." From the back seat, Officer Eric Carter, younger and visibly less confident, leaned forward. "Maybe she works here," he suggested quietly. Miller smirked and brought the cruiser to a stop. "Only one way to find out." Claire set her broom down as Miller and Brooks exited the car, their strides deliberate. Carter hesitated before following. The 3 approached her driveway, and Claire straightened, maintaining a calm exterior. "Good morning," Miller began, his tone more interrogative than friendly. "What's going on here?" Claire raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. "I'm cleaning my driveway," she replied evenly. "Your driveway?" Brooks repeated, the disbelief in his tone evident. He turned to Miller. "She says it's her house." Miller crossed his arms, his sunglasses reflecting the bright sunlight. "Mind showing us some ID? Just to clear things up." Claire's expression hardened. "I don't need to show you anything," she said firmly. "This is my property, and I've done nothing wrong." Brooks's smirk faded as he took a step closer. "Look, we've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. How do we know you didn't just wander in here?" "That's ridiculous," Claire shot back. "I moved in 3 days ago. Nobody has reported anything to me." Carter shifted uncomfortably, glancing between his colleagues. "Maybe we should just move on," he suggested, his voice low. But Miller ignored him, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "If this is really your house, you won't mind if we take a quick look inside." Claire folded her arms, her frustration bubbling beneath her calm demeanor. "Unless you have a warrant, you're not stepping inside." Miller's demeanor darkened. "You sure about that?" he said, stepping closer. "We just want to confirm everything. No need to make this difficult." Claire stood her ground. "I know my rights, officer, and unless you have legitimate cause, I suggest you leave." The tension was palpable. Miller glanced at Brooks and jerked his head toward the house. "Go check it out." Brooks hesitated but nodded, motioning for Carter to follow. Claire's heart pounded as they headed for her front door. She forced herself to remain composed, her eyes fixed on Miller. "This isn't over," she said calmly, though anger simmered beneath her steady gaze. Miller smirked, but something in her tone made him hesitate. As his colleagues disappeared into the house, Claire's mind raced. She knew this wasn't just about her, it was about standing up to abuse of power, and she wasn't about to back down. Inside the house, officers David Brooks and Eric Carter moved cautiously, their boots echoing on the polished hardwood floors. The house was tastefully decorated, though boxes remained unpacked. A formal air lingered in the space, a testament to its owner's structured lifestyle. "Doesn't look like she just wandered in," Carter muttered, his eyes scanning the living room. Brooks shrugged. "Let's make sure. Check the back." Meanwhile, outside, Claire stood firm in the face of Officer Ryan Miller. The senior officer's intimidating posture didn't rattle her. Years of leading soldiers under fire had taught her to face aggression without flinching. "You think I don't belong here," Claire said, her voice steady. "That much is clear." Miller chuckled dryly. "You're reading too much into this. We're just doing our jobs." Claire's eyes narrowed. Your job doesn't involve harassing people in their own homes. Miller stepped closer, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. Watch your tone, lady. Cooperation goes a long way. Claire's calm exterior began to crack. And so does respect, she snapped. You don't have the right to treat me this way. Before Miller could respond, the radio clipped to his shoulder crackled. Miller, we've got something here. Brooks's voice came through. Miller grabbed his radio. What is it? Inside, Brooks stood frozen in front of a large wall adorned with military plaques, framed certificates, and photographs. One image showed Claire in her army dress uniform, standing next to the city's mayor and police chief at an official ceremony. Brooks's face paled as he realized the gravity of their mistake. She's military, Brooks stammered. A major in the army, and she's connected, real connected. Carter, who had been flipping through mail on a side table, froze. Oh no, he murmured. We're in serious trouble. Brooks nodded, his voice shaking slightly as he spoke into the radio. We need to pull back. Now. Outside, Claire watched Miller's expression shift as he processed Brooks's message. For a moment, his confident smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of doubt. What's the matter, officer? Claire asked, her voice cold. You look surprised. Miller ignored her, speaking into his radio. Get out here, now. Moments later, Brooks and Carter emerged from the house, their faces pale. Brooks avoided Claire's gaze, while Carter looked as though he might apologize on the spot. Miller, Brooks began, his voice low. We should leave. Miller glared at him. Why? Brooks leaned in, whispering urgently. She's Major Claire Thompson, Army, and she's got ties to the mayor and the chief. Miller's jaw tightened, but he didn't lower his guard. So what? That doesn't mean... It means, Claire interrupted, her tone icy. You've made a terrible mistake. Miller turned to face her, his anger boiling over. You think you're untouchable because of your rank? No, Claire replied, her voice steady. But I know my rights, and you violated them. Brooks and Carter exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort growing. Look, let's just go, Carter mumbled. But Miller wasn't ready to back down. Frustrated, he drew his gun, aiming it squarely at Claire. Sit down, now. Claire froze, her heart pounding, but her years of military training kept her calm. She raised her hands slowly. Pulling a gun on an unarmed homeowner? That's brave, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Carter stepped forward. Miller, put it down, he urged, panic creeping into his tone. This is going too far. She's not in charge here, Miller snapped, his grip tightening on the weapon. No, but I am, Claire replied coolly, her eyes locking onto his. And you've already lost. Miller hesitated, his resolve faltering under her gaze. Before he could respond, Brooks reached out and placed a hand on his arm. Miller, enough. We need to leave. Now. Reluctantly, Miller lowered his weapon, though the anger in his eyes remained. Claire exhaled slowly, her pulse racing. She pointed toward the cruiser. Get off my property. Without another word, the three officers retreated to their vehicle. Claire stood motionless until the car disappeared down the street. Then she turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind her. Her hands trembled as she accessed her security footage. The entire encounter, every word, every gesture, had been recorded. Claire saved the file and opened her phone. This is Major Claire Thompson, she said when the sheriff's office answered. I need to report an incident of police misconduct. She ended the call, her jaw set. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next morning, Claire Thompson strode into the sheriff's office, her posture firm and commanding. She wore her Army service uniform, her decorations gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Conversations hushed as officers and staff turned to look at her. Claire ignored the stares and approached the front desk. I have an appointment with Sheriff Mark Hayes, she said, her voice calm but authoritative. The receptionist, a young woman who appeared slightly flustered, nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. The sheriff is expecting you. His office is down the hall, second door on the left. Thank you, Claire replied, walking purposefully toward the indicated door. Inside the sheriff's office, Mark Hayes stood as Claire entered. A tall man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, Hayes exuded a steady, experienced demeanor. His expression shifted from surprise to concern as he extended his hand. "Major Thompson, it's an honor," he said. "Please have a seat." Claire shook his hand but remained standing. "Sheriff Hayes, I'm not here for pleasantries. I've brought evidence of a serious incident involving 3 of your officers." She placed a USB drive on his desk. Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Go on," Claire explained, recounting the previous day's events in measured detail. She described how the officers had harassed her, entered her home without permission, and escalated the situation to the point where a gun was drawn. "This drive contains the full security footage," Claire said. "It captures everything, from the moment they arrived to the point they left my property." Hayes plugged the drive into his computer, and together they watched the video. As the footage played, Hayes' expression grew darker. The condescension in the officers' tones, the unauthorized entry, and the moment Miller pointed his gun at Claire were all laid bare. When the video ended, Hayes leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow breath. "This is unacceptable," he said. "I can't believe this happened under my watch." "It did," Claire replied bluntly, "and I expect action. If this isn't addressed, I'll take this to higher authorities in the media." Hayes nodded, his face resolute. "You don't have to. I'll handle it. I'll initiate an internal investigation immediately, and the officers involved will be suspended effective today." Claire's gaze was steady. "I'm holding you to that, Sheriff. This isn't just about me. It's about accountability." Hayes rose from his chair. "You have my word, Major Thompson." That afternoon, officers Ryan Miller, David Brooks, and Eric Carter were summoned to the precinct's Human Resources Office. Each received a notice of immediate suspension pending investigation. Brooks accepted the suspension quietly, avoiding eye contact. Carter appeared deeply troubled, nodding reluctantly as the HR manager explained the situation. Miller, however, was livid. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, slamming a fist on the desk. "We were doing our job." The HR manager remained composed. "Your actions were recorded, Officer Miller. You have the right to appeal, but based on the evidence, this is a serious matter. I suggest you consult legal counsel." Miller stormed out, muttering curses under his breath. Brooks and Carter followed, their expressions grim. 2 days later, Claire received a call from Sheriff Hayes. "Major Thompson, I wanted to inform you that the officers have been suspended and the investigation is underway. This will be a thorough and transparent process." Claire's voice was measured. "Thank you, Sheriff. I trust you'll follow through." But the story didn't end there. News of the incident had begun to spread. Claire's security footage, shared by Hayes as part of his commitment to transparency, quickly went viral. Local media picked up the story, and soon it was a topic of national discussion. Public outrage grew as the footage circulated online, sparking debates about police misconduct and racial profiling. Advocacy groups called for reforms, demanding stricter oversight and mandatory training for law enforcement officers. Claire, meanwhile, kept a low profile, declining most interview requests. Her focus remained on ensuring justice, not just for herself, but for others who had faced similar abuses. One evening, as she watched the news coverage of the incident, her phone buzzed. It was a message from a friend. "You've started something important. Keep going." Claire read the message and smiled faintly. She knew the fight wasn't over, but she was ready for whatever came next. 2 weeks after the incident, Sheriff Mark Hayes held a press conference in the main hall of the Pinecrest County Police Department. The room was packed with reporters, cameras flashing as Hayes stepped up to the podium. Beside him stood Claire Thompson, her Army uniform pristine and her demeanor unshakable. "Good afternoon," Hayes began, his voice steady. "Today we are addressing an incident that has brought national attention to this department. I want to assure the public that we are committed to transparency and accountability." The sheriff detailed the findings of the internal investigation. The security footage, along with witness interviews, had confirmed multiple violations by the 3 officers involved. Officer Ryan Miller, who drew his weapon on Major Claire Thompson without justification, has been charged with criminal misconduct. including assault with a deadly weapon and abuse of power, Hayes announced. He was arrested this morning and is now in custody, awaiting trial. The room erupted with murmurs from reporters. Hayes raised a hand to quiet them before continuing. Officers David Brooks and Eric Carter, who unlawfully entered Major Thompson's home without a warrant, have been terminated from the force. They will also face administrative penalties for their actions. Claire observed the crowd as the sheriff spoke. The mix of outrage and relief on the faces before her reflected the importance of this moment. As a department, we acknowledge our failure in this case, Hayes said. We offer our deepest apologies to Major Thompson and the community we are sworn to serve. This incident is a stark reminder of the work we must do to restore trust and prevent such abuses in the future. When Hayes finished, he turned to Claire. Major Thompson, would you like to say a few words? Claire stepped to the podium, her sharp gaze scanning the room. The crowd quieted, their attention fully on her. Thank you, Sheriff Hayes, she began. I want to start by saying that this isn't just my story. It's the story of countless individuals who faced injustice simply because of who they are or how they look. Her voice was firm but measured, carrying the weight of someone accustomed to commanding respect. I've dedicated my life to serving this country, to upholding the principles of justice and equality. But that day, in front of my own home, I was treated as though I didn't belong. No one should ever experience that. She paused, letting her words sink in. This isn't just about punishing individuals who abuse their power. It's about ensuring systemic change. We must demand accountability from those who are entrusted with authority, and we must work to build systems that protect everyone equally. Applause broke out as Claire stepped back. Hayes shook her hand, and together they left the stage, the press still buzzing with questions. The ripple effects of the incident were immediate. Community organizations rallied around Claire's story, using it as a platform to push for policy changes. Public forums were held, where residents voiced their concerns and shared their own experiences with law enforcement. Under growing pressure, Hayes announced a series of reforms within the department. Mandatory training. All officers would undergo anti-bias training and de-escalation techniques. Increased accountability. Body cameras would become mandatory during all public interactions, with strict penalties for tampering or disabling the devices. Community oversight. A civilian review board was established to oversee complaints and investigations involving police misconduct. These measures were met with cautious optimism. While some hailed them as a step forward, others remained skeptical, demanding sustained efforts to address deeper issues. For Claire, life had taken on a new rhythm. Though she remained deeply private, her story had made her a public figure. Advocacy groups and community leaders invited her to speak at events, and her name became synonymous with the fight for justice and reform. One evening, as she sat reviewing her notes for an upcoming town hall meeting, her phone rang. It was Sheriff Hayes. Major Thompson, he said, I just wanted to thank you again for your courage. You've pushed us to be better, and for that, I'm grateful. Claire's voice was steady. Thank you, Sheriff, but this is just the beginning. There's still more work to do. Hanging up, Claire leaned back in her chair, her mind already on the future. The fight for change was far from over, but she was ready to see it through. 2 months later, the courtroom was packed. The trial of Ryan Miller had drawn significant attention, both locally and nationally. Claire Thompson sat calmly in the witness stand, her Army uniform crisp, her demeanor unshakable. Her testimony was clear and precise, detailing the events of that morning with the same discipline she had applied throughout her career. The prosecution presented the security footage as evidence. The video played on a large screen, showing Miller drawing his gun on Claire and the other officers unlawfully entering her home. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the footage concluded, leaving no doubt about the officer's actions. Miller's defense attorney argued that his actions were a response to a high-pressure situation, but the judge was unmoved. The evidence painted a clear picture of abusive power, rooted in prejudice rather than any legitimate threat. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty. Miller was sentenced to 4 years in prison for assault with a deadly weapon and criminal misconduct. As he was led away, His expression was a mix of anger and resignation. For Claire, the moment was bittersweet. Justice had been served, but the larger battle for systemic change was far from over. In the months following the trial, the Pinecrest County Police Department implemented the promised reforms. Officers attended mandatory training sessions on bias, de-escalation, and community engagement. Body cameras became a standard issue, with strict protocols to ensure transparency. The newly formed Civilian Oversight Board quickly became a critical part of the department's accountability process. For the first time, residents felt they had a voice in how law enforcement operated in their community. Though these changes were significant, Claire knew they were only the beginning. One evening, Claire appeared on a national talk show to discuss her experience. The host, a seasoned journalist named Laura Daniels, leaned forward, her expression serious. "Major Thompson," Laura began, "looking back at everything that's happened, from the day of the incident to the reforms that followed, do you feel justice was truly served?" Claire considered the question, her hands clasped on her lap. "Justice is more than punishing those who've done wrong," she said. "It's about creating a society where such wrongs are less likely to happen in the first place. We've made progress, but there's still a long road ahead." Laura nodded. "Do you think your case has brought lasting change?" "It's brought awareness," Claire replied. "And awareness is the first step. But lasting change requires action, accountability, and persistence. It's not something that happens overnight." The audience erupted in applause, but Claire's expression remained resolute. In Pinecrest Meadows, life gradually returned to normal. Claire became a quiet but active presence in the community, participating in neighborhood events and speaking at schools about leadership, integrity, and resilience. Her story inspired many, not just because of what she endured, but because of how she turned her ordeal into a call for change. One sunny afternoon, Claire sat on her front porch, sipping a cup of tea. A young woman from the neighborhood approached, carrying a notebook. "Major Thompson?" the woman asked nervously. Claire smiled. "Just Claire is fine. How can I help you?" "I'm studying criminal justice," the woman said. "Your story, it's why I chose this path. I want to help make things better." Claire's smile widened. "That's a noble goal. Remember, real change takes courage and commitment. Stay true to that, and you'll make a difference." The woman nodded, her determination clear. As she walked away, Claire leaned back in her chair, a sense of quiet satisfaction washing over her. The fight for justice wasn't a sprint, it was a marathon. But in moments like these, she felt confident that the future was in good hands. The incident and its aftermath became a case study in police reform, taught in law schools and training academies across the country. Claire's courage in standing up for her rights became a symbol of resilience and a reminder that one voice can spark a movement. Claire continued her advocacy, but she also found peace in the life she had built. Her villa in Pinecrest Meadows became a place of solace, a space where she could reflect on the journey behind her and the road ahead. Because in Claire Thompson's world, the fight for justice never truly ended. It evolved one step at a time.